Like this one, Donald J. Dumb Trump.
The legitimacy of our republic requires public confidence in our elections. The fact that 70% of Republicans don't believe the 2020 election was free and fair, that should be of concern to everyone. That's why both sides should support allowing the post-election process provided for in our laws to work, to move forward. Our election laws call for recounts in close elections. They provide candidates the right to contest votes cast in violation of the law. They allow the right to present evidence of fraud, if you have it, to present that evidence in court. And they require meeting specific deadlines for all of this so that a winner can be certified and take office. Both Democrat and Republican candidates have used these laws themselves. They've availed themselves of these rights many times, including in this election. Joe Biden had hired an army of election lawyers to use this very process if he had fallen short in the preliminary results. And therefore, President Trump is well within his legal rights to pursue all these things under these laws now. Now, for those in the media who are angry that Republicans won't just take their word for it that Biden won, I think you need some self-awareness. You spent 4 years claiming the Russians hacked the last election. You supported Democrats when they went to court to overturn the governor's race in Georgia in 2018, and you say nothing when to this day they claim that they won that race. And you railed against how dangerous Trump rallies were. But now, you seem to have no problem with Biden supporters celebrating in big crowds. So Republicans, I think, have good reason to believe that some of you are just a little biased. The only way the outcome of this election is going to be widely accepted, which is what we need, is through the post-election process in our life.
Like this one, Donald J. Dumb Trump.
According to her 2017 obituary, Rosemary Hartle was a loving, fun, sassy, and sarcastic in a fun way. Beautiful, powerful, relentless, and inspiring. Sadly, now she's gone. But her voter registration remains. She's still on the rolls. Someone received Rosemary Hartle's ballot in the mail and then cast it. Who did this? We don't know who did it. We wish we did. We should know. It's fraud. It's a threat to our system, and it's being hidden by a news media totally vested in a Joe Biden presidency. Again, we have a right to know, we have an obligation to know much more about this. But thanks to the media blackout, it is left to independent conservative sites, places like The Federalist, to report what the rest should be reporting but are not. Thanks to The Federalist, we know that on October 9th, for example, a man called Fred Stokes Jr. received an unsolicited ballot in Clark County, Nevada. That's where Las Vegas is. 3 weeks later, the county received his ballot back by mail. Voting records indicate that ballot was, quote, completed. Fred Stokes voted for president. But Fred Stokes had been dead for 3 years. He died in June of 2017 at the age of 92. How'd that happen? We don't know. No one's reporting on it. In Pennsylvania, the state that made Joe Biden the president-elect, there are likely quite a few dead voters. How do we know that? Because the state told us. According to a report from last December, less than a year ago, from the state's Department of Auditor General, nearly 3,000 potentially deceased voters remained on the voter rolls in Pennsylvania. The Trump campaign says it has found evidence that some of them voted this year. For example, on October 24th, Allegheny County officials mailed a ballot to one Denise Odnick. She died 2 days before. Yet somehow records show that county officials received that ballot back, completed, voted for president, on November 2nd. Again, we're showing you more names on the screen just like Denise Odnick's. We can confirm that they all voted in the election last week, and all of them were dead when they did so. None of this is conjecture. It's not one of those bogus conspiracy theories that CNN worries about. It is entirely real. Why did it happen? How can we prevent it from happening again? Those are the questions. The first is very simple to answer. Democrats did it. They understand that when you send mail-in ballots to an entire unverified voter roll, you can't really know who's voting. But just to make certain that fraud remained likely, Democrats filed lawsuits in Nevada to eliminate signature verification. Think about that. In 2019, well before the coronavirus panic, Ron Wyden, this is a Democratic senator from Oregon, sponsored the Vote by Mail Act. The Vote by Mail Act demands that every state in the union mails ballots to their entire unverified voter list. Whether you ask for it or not, whether you're alive or not, you get a ballot. There's no other way to interpret this. Democrats are abetting fraud. This summer, Democrats in the House of Representatives passed something called the HEROES Act. It wouldn't simply have provided, quote, automatic mailing of absentee ballots to all voters in America. It also would have prevented states from restricting in any way ballot harvesting. That means that anyone could collect and return bundles of ballots from dead or living voters to polling stations, and there would be no oversight of this at all. That's insane, but expect more of it. Loose voting rules are too useful for the left to pass up. In January, Democrats could very well gain control of the United States Senate. If that happens, much will change, but one of the things that will happen, they will pass the HEROES Act into law. Right now, they're claiming universal mail-in balloting is necessary because of coronavirus. It's a public health emergency. We have to have it. But they're lying. They've been pushing for this very thing for years, for one reason. It gives.
Now, and that's one of the major systems that were used to cast their ballots last week. The company is called Dominion Voting. It's used in 28 states, as reported by JustTheNews.com and John Solomon. Several days ago, Dominion came under heavy fire after allegations that their machines caused thousands of votes in one Michigan county to be switched from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. Take a look.
In Antrim County, ballots were counted for Democrats that were meant for Republicans, causing a 6,000 vote swing against our candidates. The county clerk came forward and said tabulating software glitched and caused a miscalculation of the votes. Since then, we have now discovered that 47 counties use this same software in the same capacity. Antrim County had to hand count all of the ballots, and these counties that use this software need to closely examine their results for similar discrepancies.
Now, tonight we did reach out to Dominion, and they are claiming that this was caused by a human error, had nothing to do with their operating system, but according to several reports, there may be a lot more to the story. For example, back in June, during Georgia's primary, there were a lot of serious issues surrounding the state's Dominion voting machines. According to the New York Times, quote, in some cases, the new machines required too much extra power for aging polling locations, blowing fuses and never powering on. In others, workers who were still being trained just days before the election, they struggled with the setup. Then the Times goes on to write, quote, the electronic poll books also were plagued by freezing software and user error. Now, keep in mind, during the presidential election, Dominion voting machines, they were used in all of Georgia's 159 counties. And as we all know, that is a state with a razor-thin margin. So the question must be asked, by the way, don't expect the media mob to ever ask it, are Dominion systems prone to human error? 72 million Americans voted for Donald Trump. All of them, all of us, deserve an answer. And that's not the only concern being raised. In 2018, let's go to the liberal AP, reporting that Dominion, quote, long skimped on security in favor of convenience, making it more difficult to detect intrusions. In fact, Dominion voting systems were rejected 3 times by data communications experts from the Texas Secretary of State and Attorney General's office for failing to meet basic, simple security standards. Once rejected in 2013, twice rejected in 2019. That would be last year. In 2018, a prominent tenured Princeton professor who specializes in election machinery, policy, security, his name is Andrew Appel, he issued an op-ed blasting Dominion over security concerns. And according to the professor, quote, the Dominion ImageCast evolution looks like a pretty good voting machine, but it has a serious design flaw. After you mark your ballot and after you review your ballot, the voting machine can print more votes on it. Yeah, it's a big problem. He then goes on, quote, of course, the legitimate software installed by Dominion won't do that, but the machine is physically capable of it, and fraudulent software can exploit that ability. And during a hearing on Capitol Hill 2017, Dr. Appel, remember, tenured professor, Princeton, I would assume a pretty smart guy, explained how fraudulent software could be used to seriously alter elections. Wow, just 2 short years ago. Take a look.
Each voting machine is a computer running a computer program. Whether that computer counts the votes accurately or makes mistakes or cheats by shifting votes from one candidate to another depends on what software is installed in the computer. Installing new software is how you hack a voting machine to cheat. I wrote a vote-stealing computer program that shifts votes from one candidate to another. Installing that vote-stealing program in a voting machine takes 7 minutes per machine with a screwdriver. But really, the software I built was not rocket science. Any computer programmer could write the same code. Once it's installed, it could steal elections without detection for years to come.
Now, am I saying tonight this happened with Dominion in this cycle? No. How would I possibly know? Now, we do know that there have been so many warnings. The New York Times, the Associated Press, there's been congressional hearings. You have the Attorney General and Secretary of State of Texas twice last year rejecting the system, a Princeton tenured professor, all trying to warn us about this system. 28 states used it this election. And I'll add, if we want to have as a country election results with integrity that the people of this country will have confidence in, we can easily and absolutely have a system forensically checked. And by the way, I'll even argue allowing both Republican and Democratic engineers to do the forensic check together. And for example, if Texas rejected the system, well, 3 separate times, don't we owe it to every American to know which is the best, the most reliable and accurate system so we can have confidence in the voting in this country? We're a powerful country. We're an advanced country. Guess what? We can and must eliminate any chance of fraud or abuse or corruption or questioning of integrity and competence. There's good reason here not to have confidence or not to believe this is fair. And in states with razor-thin margins like Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, we owe it to the American people to do all due diligence and make sure that every legal vote is counted. Now, sadly, that's especially hard to do in states with widespread mail-in voting. Now, the New York Times may have actually forgotten their own reporting, kind of like Joe Biden on this very subject. In 2012, they warned about the increased risk of fraud and abuse incurred with mail-in voting. In fact, they actually ran a front-page story, not saying Hannity's awful or evil, and they cast grave doubt on the reliability of widespread mail-in voting and indicated it was, quote, more vulnerable to fraud than conventional voting. New York Times said that. New York Times, well, for once, they actually got something right.
And anybody who wants this country to remain free needs to step up right now. These are federal felonies. Altering a vote or changing a ballot is a federal felony. People need to come forward now and get on the right side of this issue and report the fraud they know existed in Dominion voting systems, because that's what it was created to do. It was its sole original purpose. It has been used all over the world to defy the will of people who wanted freedom.
Cindy, at the outset of this broadcast, I said that this is the culmination of what has been over a 4-year effort to overthrow this president, to first deny his candidacy, the election, but then to overthrow his presidency. This looks like the effort to carry out an end game in the effort against him. Do you concur?
Oh, absolutely, and it's been organized and conducted with the help of Silicon Valley people, the big tech companies, the social media companies, and even the media companies. And I'm going to release the Kraken.
Well, good, because this is an extraordinary and such a dangerous moment in our history. I really am very concerned for the country. I am very concerned for all Americans. And I have a feeling that most Democrats are first Americans and not Democrats. They have to be as alarmed as any one of us. Cindy, we're glad that you are on the charge to straighten out all of this. It is a foul mess, and it is far more sinister than any of us could have imagined, even over the course of the past 4 years. You get the last word, Sydney.
It is indeed a very foul mess. It is farther and wider and deeper than we ever thought, but we are going to go after it, and I am going to expose every one of them.
I might share one more thing. Sunday, I had information from some of our former intel people that there was extremely compelling evidence that could be gleaned from Skandal, that's SCYTL. That's a company headquartered in Barcelona, Spain, that was responsible for aggregating all the information from all the machines and whatnot. But now the main headquarters had moved to Frankfurt. You know, Frankfurt, where Merkel in Germany has said the day after the election that Trump needed to go ahead and concede. Well, they were going through bankruptcy, but that information as to how many votes were switched from Republican for Democrat would have been easily established from the information that Skandal gathered, and you know what were the votes going in and which ones were changed going out. And he said, "Can you send me exactly the information we need to gather?" And so I got that information and sent it in the wee hours Monday morning. And before he would have had a chance to make a request to get any of that information, it turns out that I don't know the truth. I know that there was a German tweet in German saying that on Monday, U.S. Army forces went into Skandal and grabbed their server. There's some that believe this is the U.S. intelligence that manipulated all this in order to cover their own rear ends. But it's a little disturbing to just contemplate how corrupt the government has gotten with the whole Russia hoax, the framing of Mike Flynn, and so many others, Carter Page, Papadopoulos. So this is a desperate time for our country when those that are entrusted.
Basically, what most Americans don't understand is that voting is done by private companies. The elections are conducted by private companies under contract from the county. And we went in and started looking at these private companies and their software and their security, and we realized, first off, there are no security standards. So there are no national standards that any voting company needs to meet as far as the security on their software. And as a result of that, we then began to look and we realized how easy it is to change votes. The software is so bad you can easily change the audit trail so that later you cannot even forensically go back and find out the votes that were changed. And that led us to a number of areas. One, we said, well, what happens to your vote after whatever the voting company locally does to it? What happens to it? Well, it turns out in the case of Texas and 28 other states, it all goes to a server in Frankfurt, Germany, which is owned by Barcelona, Spain multinational, and that's who actually controls and reports your vote.
I got to jump in. So here in Texas, if you vote early, and so your vote is being stored, you think, safely somewhere, the data about all the votes in Texas and 27 other states, the early voting data is actually being held in a server in Germany.
That is correct. And not only that, but in their process, and by a company called Skandal, and in their process, we can even see malware sitting there collecting all the credentials of all the county workers everywhere who are submitting information up, which means you can now go back into the county and change votes there too. So you don't just change it in Frankfurt, you can go back and even change it here. And the software is just that bad, and it is that insecure that someone with a reasonable knowledge of hacking could absolutely go in and change it. And we're seeing now the issue you were talking about with all the vote harvesting and absentee and early voting and mail-in voting. We're seeing what happens when software that is that bad gets out.
An upstate USPS employee was arrested Tuesday while crossing the U.S.-Canada border with hundreds of envelopes and other undelivered mail, including several absentee ballots. The Buffalo mailman, who was caught with over 800 pieces of mail inside his trunk that he had failed to deliver, said he had ended up on a bridge between the U.S. and its neighbor to the north by accident, the Buffalo News reported. Customs and Border Protection found a huge bin of mail spanning several zip codes in the vehicle. Among them were 3 absentee ballots from the Erie County Board of Elections, authorities told the newspaper. Brandon Wilson, 27, told CBP agents he was in the wrong lane while traveling on Interstate 190 and accidentally wound up on the bridge. When pressed, Wilson claimed that the mail was for his mother, though he was unable to explain why the names on the packages did not match. Wilson later admitted in an interview with the Postal Service Office of Inspector General that he had been taking mail from his delivery route and putting it in his car. Beginning in September 2020, Wilson estimated he placed mail from his delivery routes into the trunk of his vehicle on more than 4 but less than 10 instances after returning to the post office from his assigned route, Special Agent Brendan M. Boone wrote in a report. Wilson intended to whittle down the amount of mail in the trunk of his vehicle by placing a small amount of the mail into USPS Mazort containers in the morning before his shift began. Wilson last reintroduced mailings into the mail stream in this fashion approximately 3 weeks prior to the date of the interview. Wilson denied knowing that he was in possession of 3 absentee ballots, which have become a focal point in the contentious 2020 presidential election. He has been charged with delaying or destroying mail, according to court documents. He faces 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine if convicted.
Hey folks, welcome to the second hour of American Agenda. I'm Bob Sellers. Attorney General William Barr is urging federal prosecutors to examine allegations of voting irregularities before states certify election results in the coming weeks. This says the president and his legal team continued to make the case for election fraud. Joining me now is the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who's leading this election legal fight. So tell me, sir, how are things going? Where do things stand right now?
Well, after filing the lawsuit yesterday in Pennsylvania, which supported by 50 plus witnesses that say that Republicans were excluded from observing over 600,000 questionable ballots in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and only in those 2 Democrat corrupt cities, really. The rest of Pennsylvania, no problem. We think we have a good chance. Also, when you consider the additional allegations of fraud there, to have that vote overturned and not certified.
Well,
I mean, the margin of victory was only 40,000 after the president had been ahead by 700,000. And I think we can show that this was part of a concerted effort on the part of the Democrat Party to do this in 10 different states. Because the same thing they did in Philadelphia, herd the Republicans in corrals, not let them see the ballot. They did it in Pittsburgh. They did it in Detroit. They did it in Milwaukee. They did it in Phoenix. They did it in Las Vegas. They did it in all these places where they have this Democrat, machine. And it's impossible that every one of these Democratic leaders woke up the day after the election with the same idea of not allowing Republicans to see the mail ballots and corral them into chutes, even though the law of their state requires that it be observed by a Republican and a Democrat. And forever, we've done that with absentee ballots. Second, we're about to file a lawsuit now in Michigan in which, again, hundreds of thousands of ballots were cast without any observation. A Democrat whistleblower working for the board in Detroit has come forward and has given evidence of days and days of fraud, preparation for it, backdating of votes, going into the polling place with people, showing them how to vote, taking votes of people that weren't registered, and then actually going to the registrar book and registering at the time. She observed all of this. She was disgusted with it. She's a Democrat. She's come forward. She's given us an affidavit, and she's at the heart of the Democratic case that we have, which will be filed in Lansing, Michigan, which will show that well more than the margin of victory are illegal votes. And then a very extraordinary thing, somewhere around 4 or 4:30 in the morning on November 4, right after the election, 100,000 or so ballots showed up. at the headquarters. The observers were leaving at that time, so the crooked Democrats in Detroit figured they could count the ballots when the observers weren't around. However, several observers remained behind, and they have given us affidavits. And the affidavits say that these 100,000 ballots that were not properly packaged. They're supposed to be packaged in a big wooden box with an inner box and a seal. They look more like this. Some that have come in earlier in the day, they look somewhat more like in boxes like this. Don't know if you can see that.
Okay. Yeah.
And then were laid out like that, which completely destroys the secrecy of the ballot. And then all of a sudden they began counting them very quickly. And three different affiants, people who have sworn under oath, this is one of them, Andrew Cito, said that all of these votes, to the extent that he heard them being called out or he observed them, were for Joseph Biden.
Okay,
and every
and
ballot he saw had no one else on the ballot.
Just to be clear, you're talking about that occurred allegedly in Michigan? Is that where you're saying that?
Yes, I'll read you the affidavit.
No, that's okay. You don't have to read it. I just want to make clear where you were talking about. And
I'm sorry. I'm talking about Andrew Cito in Michigan, in Detroit, Michigan, at the TCF Center. He was there from 9:30 in the morning. He remained behind when many other people left. At 4:30 in the morning, these shipment of absentee ballots came in. He was told that there were several vehicles outside with out-of-state license plates. They pulled up to the center at 4:30, and they unloaded many boxes of ballots.
Okay.
Tens of thousands of ballots were brought in and placed on 8 long tables.
But, Mr. Mayor, could I ask you a question about the process here? Could I ask you, so you filed suit in Pennsylvania regarding the allegations of fraud that you have. Obviously, you say you're going to go to Lansing as far as this situation. I'm kind of curious, what's the timing here in which you expect to get some sort of answer? How it turns out, what kind of remedy are you looking for?
Well, in the case of both Pennsylvania and Michigan, in fact, in every state, this election is guided by the laws of the state legislature. And then it's the state legislature that has to certify the result as honest and fair. We're in a position in both Pennsylvania and Michigan where they can't possibly do that. And now we will move on to Georgia, where the same thing happened, to Wisconsin, to Nevada, where the same thing happened, to Arizona. It's very, very curious that, on Tuesday night, the president was way ahead by 800,000 votes in Pennsylvania, 5% in Michigan, 8% in Wisconsin. And by the next morning, because of things like this, votes being brought in the middle of the night, the whole thing had changed.
Well, there are people
it happened in all these places. It can't be a coincidence that they decided they would exclude Republican observers in every one of these places at exactly the same time.
Okay. So in Pennsylvania, you have already filed suit regarding these allegations, correct? Do you know when you would get some sort of answer on that issue?
Well, it's up to the court, and of course, it has to be done on an expedited basis. We have to have an opportunity to call the witnesses. We have 50 of them, but their testimony is rather short, and it's all in affidavit form already. We have to make a record and then hopefully bring it to the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. At the same time, we'll be moving ahead in Lansing, Michigan. There's already been a private case filed in Michigan 2 days ago, similar to ours, but not as complete.
And how many states total have you made or plan to make allegations similar to this?
I would say anywhere from 8 to 10.
Okay.
All of them are states in which we have one common allegation and then different things. The common allegation is that when they started counting these new mail-in votes, they excluded Republicans from observing. They put Republicans mostly in corrals that were 20 and 30 feet away and wouldn't allow us to see most, if at all, any of the ballots.
And what kind of remedy?
What kind of things like we have these ballots that are brought in the middle of the night. We have backdated ballots.
Right.
The ballots had to end on November 3rd, according to Justice Alito. We have thousands and thousands and thousands that have been backdated, and we have witnesses for all of them.
Okay.
So we have numerous instances of fraud, but the common theme is excluding Republicans in 10 different places. And the same system was used, has to have been a common objective.
Now, if the states come back and say, yes, they were allowed to observe, or even though they were not permitted to observe as you would wish, what do you think the remedy should be? Throwing out every ballot, throwing out the ones involved with that? What would you expect a remedy to be?
First of all, the states aren't going to come back and say they weren't counted the way we wish. They weren't counted based on the law of the state. Each one of these states.
So how does it resolve itself? If they come out, if they were to say, you're absolutely right, that is what happened, and of course we know there'll be arguments against that, but if they say, yes, you're right, how do you think this resolves itself? What happens?
Well, first of all, the votes can't be certified then. The state legislature can't certify an unlawful vote count.
So the state would not certify it, and then what would happen after that?
What we would ask for is that you deduct in those counties the number of votes that we have proven were unlawfully examined.
Okay.
So it's easiest in Pennsylvania because we've done the arithmetic. We can count 633,000 votes that were submitted without any observation by a neutral observer, and certainly not by a Republican.
Okay.
In Detroit,
you don't. In that case, you want them thrown out. You don't want a recount. You want them thrown out.
Well, there's no reason to recount them. You can no longer tell whether they're valid or not. Once you remove the envelope, you remove the only thing that tells you whether they're valid or not.
Right. That becomes the naked ballot at that point.
The naked ballot. That's why mail-in voting, even by justices of the Supreme Court 10 and 12 years ago, was thought to be a horrible thing to do.
All right, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to
fraught with fraud.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to run, but I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you for the hearing, because a lot of people, a lot of networks don't allow us to bring this information to the public.
Well, we appreciate you talking to us, bringing us up to date. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Rudy Giuliani. Thanks so much.
Newsmax TV is now America's fastest growing cable news channel. We give you the real news you need. So subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a thumbs up. If you like this video, share it with your friends. Newsmax TV streams live on YouTube for free. Newsmax TV, real news for real people.
Just last night in Oakland County, we found 2,000 ballots that had been given to Democrats that were Republican ballots due to a clerical error, and this took place in Rochester Hills. In Wayne County, Republican poll watchers were denied their legal right to monitor the election and purposely kept in the dark, both literally and figuratively, with poll workers blocking windows and padlocking doors. There are hundreds of reports of our poll watchers being intimidated and unable to do their job. There was a major software issue in Antrim County that we have concerns could have caused problems in other counties as well. This issue was brought to our attention by Congressman Bergman's office when they noticed the results being drastically different from what they expected and what they have received.
Okay, there's Rhonda McGann, the RNC chair, talking about violations and irregularities that she's concerned about, especially in the state of Michigan.
We want every legal vote to be counted, and we want every illegal vote to be...
Whoa. I just think we have to be very clear. She's charging, the other side is welcoming fraud and welcoming illegal voting. Unless she has more details to back that up, I can't in good countenance continue showing you this.
If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. If you count the votes that came in late, we're looking at them very strongly, but a lot of votes came in late. I've already decisively won many critical states, including massive victories in Florida, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio.
Okay, here we are again in the unusual position of not only interrupting the President of the United States, but correcting the President of the United States.
Ken, what have you learned, sir?
Oh, shit. Fuck.
Okay.